Question 8. The existence of God in things. Prologue. Since it evidently belongs to the infinite to be present everywhere and in all things, we now consider whether this belongs to God. And concerning this, there arise 4 points of inquiry. 1. Whether God is in all things. 2. Whether God is everywhere. 3. Whether God is everywhere by essence, power, and presence. 4. Whether to be everywhere belongs to God alone. Article 1. Whether God is in all things. Objection 1. It seems that God is not in all things, for what is above all things is not in all things, but God is above all, according to Psalm 112, 4. The Lord is high above all nations, etc. Therefore, God is not in all things. Objection 2. Further, what is in anything is thereby contained. Now, God is not contained by things, but rather does he contain them. Therefore, God is not in things, but things are rather in him. Hence, Augustine says, Tog, Tri, Quest, Q, 20, that in him things are rather than he is in any place. Objection 3. Further, the more powerful an agent is, the more extended is its action. But God is the most powerful of all agents, therefore his action can extend to things which are far removed from him. Nor is it necessary that he should be in all things. Objection 4. Further, the demons are beings, but God is not in the demons, for there is no fellowship between light and darkness. 2 Corinthians 6:14. Therefore God is not in all things. On the contrary, a thing is wherever it operates, but God operates in all things, according to Isaiah 26:12. Lord, thou hast wrought all our works in us. Therefore God is in all things. I answer that God is in all things, not, indeed, as part of their essence, nor as an accident, but as an agent is present to that upon which it works. For an agent must be joined to that wherein it acts, immediately and touch it by its power. Hence it is proved in Physics 7 that the thing moved and the mover must be joined together. Now, since God is very being by his own essence, created being must be his proper effect, as to ignite is the proper effect of fire. Now God causes this effect in things not only when they first begin to be, but as long as they are preserved in being. As light is caused in the air by the sun, as long as the air remains illuminated. Therefore, as long as a thing has being, God must be present to it, according to its mode of being. But being is innermost in each thing, and most fundamentally inherent in all things, since it is formal in respect of everything found in a thing, as was shown above, question 7, article 1. Hence it must be that God is in all things, and innermostly. Reply to objection 1. God is above all things by the excellence of his nature. Nevertheless, he is in all things as the cause of the being of all things, as was shown above in this article. Reply to objection 2. Although corporal things are said to be in another, as in that which contains them, nevertheless spiritual things contain those things in which they are, as the soul contains the body. Hence also God is in things containing them. Nevertheless, by a certain similitude to corporal things, it is said that all things are in God, inasmuch as they are contained by him. Reply to objection 3. No action of an agent, however powerful it may be, acts at a distance, except through a medium. But it belongs to the great power of God that he acts immediately in all things. Hence nothing is distant from him, as if it could be without God in itself. But things are said to be distant from God by the unlikeness to him in nature or grace, as also he is above all by the excellence of his own nature. Reply to objection 4. In the demons, there is their nature which is from God, and also the deformity of sin which is not from him. Therefore, it is not to be absolutely conceded that God is in the demons, except with the addition, inasmuch as they are beings. But in things not deformed in their nature, we must say absolutely that God is. Article 2. Whether God is everywhere. Objection 1. It seems that God is not everywhere. For to be everywhere means to be in every place, but to be in every place does not belong to God, to whom it does not belong to be in place at all. For incorporeal things, as Boethius says, the Hadam, are not in a place, therefore God is not everywhere. Objection 2. Further, the relation of time to succession is the same as the relation of place to permanence, but one indivisible part of action or movement cannot exist in different times. Therefore, neither can one indivisible part in the genus of permanent things be in every place. Now, the divine being is not successive but permanent. Therefore, God is not in many places, and thus he is not everywhere. Objection 3. Further, what is wholly in any one place is not in part elsewhere. But if God is in any one place, he is all there. For he has no parts. No part of him then is elsewhere. And therefore God is not everywhere. On the contrary, it is written, I fill heaven and earth. Jerome 23:24. I answer that. Oh, sorry. I think it's Jeremiah 23:24. I answer that since place is a thing, to be in place can be understood in a twofold sense, either by way of other things, that is, as one thing is said to be in another no matter how, and thus the accidents of a place are in place, or by a way proper to place, and thus things placed are in a place. Now in both these senses, in some way God is in every place, and this is to be everywhere. First, as he is in all things giving them being, power, and operation, so he is in every place as giving it existence and locative power. Again, things placed are in place, inasmuch as they fill place, and God fills every place, not, indeed, like a body, for a body is said to fill place, inasmuch as it excludes the co-presence of another body, whereas by God being in a place, others are not thereby excluded from it. Indeed, by the very fact that he gives being to the things that fill every place, he himself fills every place. Reply to objection 1. Incorporeal things are in place not by contact of dimensive quantity, as bodies are, but by contact of power. Reply to objection 2. The indivisible is twofold. One is the term of the continuous, as a point in permanent things, and as a moment in succession, and this kind of the indivisible in permanent things, for as much as it has a determinate site, cannot be in many parts of place or in many places. Likewise, the indivisible of action or movement, for as much as it has a determinate order in movement or action, cannot be in many parts of time. Another kind of indivisible is outside of the whole genus of the continuous, and in this way incorporeal substances like God, angel, and soul are called indivisible. Such a kind of indivisible does not belong to the continuous as a part of it, but as touching it by its power. Hence, according as its power can extend itself to one or to many, to a small thing or to a great one, in this way it is in one or in many places, and in a small or large place. Reply to objection 3. A whole is so called with reference to its part. Now, part is twofold, viz., a part of the essence, as the form and the matter are called parts of the composite, while genus and difference are called parts of species. There is also part of quantity into which any quantity is divided. What therefore is whole in any place by totality of quantity cannot be outside of that place, because the quantity of anything placed is commensurate to the quantity of the place, and hence there is no totality of quantity without totality of place, but totality of essence is not commensurate to the totality of place. Hence it is not necessary for that which is whole by totality of essence in a thing not to be at all outside of it. This appears also in accidental forms, which have accidental quantity. As an example, whiteness is whole in each part of the surface if we speak of its totality of essence, because according to the perfect idea of its species, it is found to exist in every part of the surface. But if its totality be considered according to quantity, which it has accidentally, then it is not whole in every part of the surface. On the other hand, incorporeal substances have no totality either of themselves or accidentally, except in reference to the perfect idea of their essence. Hence, as the soul is whole in every part of the body, so is God whole in all things and in each one. Article 3. Whether God is everywhere by essence, presence, and power. It seems that the mode of God's existence in all things is not properly described by way of essence, presence, and power. For what is by essence in anything is in it essentially. But God is not essentially in all things, for he does not belong to the essence of anything. Therefore, it ought not to be said that God is in things by essence, presence, and power. Objection 2. Further, to be present in anything means not to be absent from it. Now, this is the meaning of God being in things by his essence, that he is not absent from anything. Therefore, the presence of God in all things by essence and presence means the same thing. Therefore, it is superfluous to say that God is present in things by his essence, presence, and power. Objection 3. Further, as God by his power is the principle of all things, so he is the same likewise by his knowledge and will. But it is not said that he is in things by knowledge and will. Therefore, neither is he present by his power. Objection 4. Further, as grace is a perfection added to the substance of a thing, so many other perfections are likewise added. Therefore, if God is said to be in certain persons in a special way by grace, it seems that according to every perfection there ought to be a special mode of God's existence in things. On the contrary, a gloss on the Canticle of Canticles 5 says that God, by a common mode, is in all things by his presence, power, and substance. Still, he is said to be present more familiarly in some by grace. I answer that God is said to be in a thing in two ways. In one way, after the manner of an efficient cause, and thus he is in all things created by him. In another way, he is in things as the object of operation is in the operator. And this is proper to the operations of the soul, according as the thing known is in the one who knows, and the thing desired in the one desiring. In this second way, God is especially in the rational creature, which knows and loves him actually or habitually. And because the rational creature possesses this prerogative by grace, as will be shown later, question 12, he is said to be thus in the saints by grace. But now, he is in other things created by him, may be considered from human affairs. A king, for example, is said to be in the whole kingdom by his power, although he is not everywhere present. Again, a thing is said to be by its presence in other things which are subject to its inspection. As things in a house are said to be present to anyone who nevertheless may not be in substance in every part of the house. Lastly, a thing is said to be by way of substance or essence in that place in which its substance may be. Now, there were some, the Manichees, who said that spiritual and incorporeal things were subject to the divine power, but that visible and corporeal things were subject to the power of a contrary principle. Therefore, against these, it is necessary to say that God is in all things by his power. But others, though they believed that all things were subject to the divine power, still did not allow that divine providence extended to these inferior bodies. And in the person of these, it is said, he walketh about the poles of the heavens, and he doth not consider our things. Job 22:14. Against these, it is necessary to say that God is in all things by his presence. Further, others said that although all things are subject to God's providence, still all things are not immediately created by God, but that he immediately created the first creatures, and these created the others. Against these, it is necessary to say that he is in all things by his essence. Therefore, God is in all things by his power. Inasmuch as all things are subject to his power, he is by his presence in all things. As all things are bare and open to his eyes, he is in all things by his essence, inasmuch as he is present to all as the cause of their being. Reply to objection 1. God is said to be in all things by essence, not indeed by the essence of the things themselves, as if he were of their essence, but by his own essence, because his substance is present to all things as the cause of their being. Reply to objection 2. A thing can be said to be present to another, when in its sight, though the thing may be distant in substance, as was shown in this article, and therefore two modes of presence are necessary, viz., by essence and by presence. Reply to objection 3. Knowledge and will require that one thing known should be in the one who knows, and the thing willed in the one who wills. Hence by knowledge and will, things are more truly in God than God in things. But power is the principle of acting on another. Hence by power, the agent is related and applied to an external thing. Thus by power, an agent may be said to be present to another. Reply to objection 4. No other perfection, except grace, added to substance, renders God present in anything, as the object known and loved. Therefore only grace constitutes a special mode of God's existence in things. There is, however, another special mode of God's existence in man by union, which will be treated of in its own place. TP. Article 4. Whether to be everywhere belongs to God alone. Objection 1. It seems that to be everywhere does not belong to God alone, for the universal, according to the philosopher Posterior, Book 1 or 1, is everywhere, and always. Primary matter also, since it is in all bodies, is everywhere. But neither of these is God, as appears from what is said above, question 3. Therefore to be everywhere does not belong to God alone. Objection 2. Further, number is in things numbered, but the whole universe is constituted in number, as appears from the Book of Wisdom, Wisdom 11:21. Therefore there is some number which is in the whole universe, and is thus everywhere. Objection 3. Further, the universe is a kind of whole perfect body, Coel et Mund, but Book 1. But the whole universe is everywhere. Because there is no place outside it, therefore to be everywhere does not belong to God alone. Objection 4. Further, if any body were infinite, no place would exist outside of it, and so it would be everywhere. Therefore, to be everywhere does not appear to belong to God alone. Objection 5. Further, the soul, as Augustine says, the Trine, Book 6, is whole in the whole body, and whole in every one of its parts. Therefore, if there was only one animal in the world, its soul would be everywhere, and thus to be everywhere does not belong to God alone. Objection 6. Further, as Augustine says, episode or EP 137, the soul feels where it sees, and lives where it feels, and is where it lives. But the soul sees as it were everywhere, for in a succession of glances it comprehends the entire space of the heavens in its sight. Therefore the soul is everywhere. On the contrary, Ambrose says, the Spirit Sanct, Book 1, 7, who dares to call the Holy Ghost a creature, who in all things and everywhere and always is, which assuredly belongs to the divinity alone. I answer that, to be everywhere primarily and absolutely is proper to God. Now to be everywhere primarily is said of that which in its whole self is everywhere. For if a thing were everywhere according to its parts in different places, it would not be primarily everywhere. For as much as what belongs to anything according to part does not belong to it primarily. Thus, if a man has white teeth, whiteness belongs primarily, not to the man, but to his teeth. But a thing is everywhere absolutely when it does not belong to it to be everywhere accidentally. That is, merely on some supposition, as a grain of millet would be everywhere, supposing that no other body existed. It belongs therefore to a thing to be everywhere absolutely when, on any supposition, it must be everywhere, and this properly belongs to God alone. For whatever number of places be supposed, even if an infinite number be supposed besides what already exists, it would be necessary that God should be in all of them, for nothing can exist except by him. Therefore, to be everywhere primarily and absolutely belongs to God and is proper to him. Because whatever number of places be supposed to exist, God must be in all of them, not as to a part of him, but as to his very self. Reply to objection 1. The universal and also primary matter are indeed everywhere, but not according to the same mode of existence. Reply to objection 2. Number, since it is an accident, does not of itself exist in place but accidentally. Neither is the whole but only part of it in each of the things numbered. Hence, it does not follow that it is primarily and absolutely everywhere. Reply to objection 3. The whole body of the universe is everywhere, but not primarily, for as much as it is not wholly in each place, but according to its parts, nor again is it everywhere absolutely, because, supposing that other places existed besides itself, it would not be in them. Reply to objection 4. If an infinite body existed, it would be everywhere, but according to its parts. Reply to objection 5. Were there one animal only, its soul would be everywhere primarily indeed, but only accidentally. Reply to objection 6. When it is said that the soul sees anywhere, this can be taken in two senses. In one sense, the adverb anywhere determines the act of seeing on the part of the object, and in this sense it is true that while it sees the heavens, it sees in the heavens, and in the same way it feels in the heavens, but it does not follow that it lives or exists in the heavens, because to live and to exist do not import an act passing to an exterior object. In another sense, it can be understood according as the adverb determines the act of the seer, as proceeding from the seer, and thus it is true that where the soul feels and sees, there it is, and there it lives according to this mode of speaking, and thus it does not follow that it is everywhere. Question 9. The immutability of God. Prologue. We next consider God's immutability, and his eternity following on his immutability. On the immutability of God, there are 2 points of inquiry. 1. Whether God is altogether immutable. 2. Whether to be immutable belongs to God alone. Article 1. Whether God is altogether immutable. Objection 1. It seems that God is not altogether immutable, for whatever moves itself is in some way mutable. But as Augustine says, Gen. Ad Lit. Book 8:20, the Creator Spirit moves himself neither by time nor by place. Therefore, God is in some way mutable. Objection 2. Further, it is said of wisdom that it is more mobile than all things active. Wisdom 7:24. But God is wisdom itself. Therefore, God is movable. Objection 3. Further, to approach and to recede signify movement, but these are said of God in Scripture. Draw nigh to God, and he will draw nigh to you. James 4:8. Therefore God is mutable. On the contrary, it is written, I am the Lord, and I change not. Malachi 3:6. I answer that, from what proceeds, it is shown that God is altogether immutable. First, because it was shown above that there is some first being whom we call God, and that this first being must be pure act, without the admixture of any potentiality. For the reason that absolutely potentiality is posterior to act, now everything which is in any way changed is in some way in potentiality. Hence, it is evident that it is impossible for God to be in any way changeable. Secondly, because everything which is moved remains as it was in part, and passes away in part, as what is moved from whiteness to blackness remains the same as to substance. Thus, in everything which is moved, there is some kind of composition to be found. But it has been shown above, question 3, article 7, that in God there is no composition, for he is altogether simple. Hence, it is manifest that God cannot be moved. Thirdly, because everything which is moved acquires something by its movement, and attains to what it had not attained previously, but since God is infinite, comprehending in himself all the plenitude of perfection of all being, he cannot acquire anything new, nor extend himself to anything whereto he was not extended previously. Hence, movement in no way belongs to him. So, some of the ancients, constrained, as it were, by the truth, decided that the first principle was immovable. Reply to objection 1. Augustine there speaks in a similar way to Plato, who said that the first mover moves himself, calling every operation a movement, even as the acts of understanding, and willing, and loving are called movements. Therefore, because God understands and loves himself, in that respect, they said that God moves himself. Not, however, as movement and change belong to a thing existing in potentiality, as we now speak of change and movement. Reply to objection 2. Wisdom is called mobile by way of similitude, according as it diffuses its likeness even to the outermost of things. For nothing can exist which does not proceed from the divine wisdom, by way of some kind of imitation, as from the first effective informal principle, as also works of art proceed from the wisdom of the artist. And so in the same way, inasmuch as the similitude of the divine wisdom proceeds in degrees from the highest things which participate more fully of its likeness, to the lowest things which participate of it in a lesser degree, there is said to be a kind of procession and movement of the divine wisdom to things, as when we say that the sun proceeds to the earth, inasmuch as the ray of light touches the earth. In this way, Dionysius Coercier, Book 1 expounds the matter, that every procession of the divine manifestation comes to us from the movement of the Father of Light. Reply to Objection 3. These things are said of God in Scripture metaphorically, for as the sun is said to enter a house or to go out, according as its rays reach the house, so God is said to approach to us or to receive from us, when we receive the influx of his goodness or decline from him. Article 2. Whether to be immutable belongs to God alone. Objection 1. It seems that to be immutable does not belong to God alone, for the philosopher says, Metaphysics, Book 2, that matter is in everything which is moved. But according to some, certain created substances, as angels and souls, have not matter. Therefore, to be immutable does not belong to God alone. Objection 2. Further, everything in motion moves to some end. What therefore has already attained its ultimate end is not in motion, but some creatures have already attained to their ultimate end, as all the blessed in heaven. Therefore, some creatures are immovable. Objection 3. Further, everything which is mutable is variable, but forms are invariable, for it is said, Sex Princip, Book 1, that form is essence consisting of the simple and invariable. Therefore, it does not belong to God alone to be immutable. On the contrary, Augustine says, Denat Boni, Book 1, God alone is immutable, and whatever things he has made, being from nothing, are mutable. I answer that God alone is altogether immutable, whereas every creature is in some way mutable. Be it known, therefore, that a mutable thing can be called so in two ways, by a power in itself, and by a power possessed by another. For all creatures before they existed were possible, not by any created power, since no creature is eternal, but by the divine power alone, inasmuch as God could produce them into existence. Thus, as the production of a thing into existence depends on the will of God, so likewise it depends on his will that things should be preserved. For he does not preserve them otherwise than by ever giving them existence. Hence, if he took away his action from them, all things would be reduced to nothing, as appears from Augustine, Gen. Ad Lit. Book 4, 12. Therefore, as it was in the Creator's power to produce them before they existed in themselves, so likewise it is in the Creator's power when they exist in themselves to bring them to nothing. In this way, therefore, by the power of another, namely, of God, they are mutable, inasmuch as they are producible from nothing by him, and are by him reducible from existence to non-existence. If, however, a thing is called mutable by a power in itself, thus also in some manner every creature is mutable, for every creature has a twofold power, active and passive, and I call that power passive, which enables anything to attain its perfection either in being or in attaining its end. Now, if the mutability of a thing be considered according to its power for being, in that way all creatures are not mutable, but those only in which that what is potential in them is consistent with non-being. Hence, in the inferior bodies there is mutability both as regards substantial being, inasmuch as their matter can exist with privation of their substantial form, and also as regards their accidental being, supposing the subject to coexist with privation of accident. As, for example, this subject, man, can exist with not whiteness, and can therefore be changed from white to not white. But supposing the accident to be such as to follow on the essential principles of the subject, then the privation of such an accident cannot coexist with the subject. Hence, the subject cannot be changed as regards that kind of accident, as, for example, snow cannot be made black. Now, in the celestial bodies, matter is not consistent with privation of form, because the form perfects the whole potentiality of the matter. Therefore, these bodies are not mutable as to substantial being, but only as to locality, because the subject is consistent with privation of this or that place. On the other hand, incorporeal substances, being subsistent forms, which although with respect to their own existence, are as potentiality to act, are not consistent with the privation of this act. For as much as existence is consequent upon form, and nothing corrupts except it lose its form, hence in the form itself there is no power to non-existence, and so these kinds of substances are immutable and invariable as regards their existence. Wherefore Dionysius says, Div Nom, Book 4, that intellectual created substances are pure from generation, and that from every variation, as also are incorporeal and immaterial substances. Still, there remains in them a twofold mutability, one as regards their potentiality to their end, and in that way there is in them a mutability according to choice from good to evil, as Damascene says, De Fide 2, 3, 4. The order as regards place, inasmuch as by their finite power they attain to a certain fresh places, which cannot be said of God, who by his infinity fills all places, as was shown above, question 8, article 2. Thus, in every creature there is a potentiality to change, either as regards substantial being, as in the case of things corruptible, or as regards locality only, as in the case of the celestial bodies, or as regards the order to their end, and the application of their powers to diverse objects, as in the case with the angels, and universally all creatures generally are mutable by the power of the Creator, in whose power is their existence and non-existence. Hence, since God is in none of these ways mutable, it belongs to him alone to be altogether immutable. Reply to objection 1. This objection proceeds from mutability as regards substantial or accidental being, for philosophers treated of such movement. Reply to objection 2. The good angels, besides their natural endowment of immutability of being, have also immutability of election by divine power. Nevertheless, there remains in them mutability as regards place. Reply to objection 3. Forms are called invariable forasmuch as they cannot be subjects of variation, but they are subject to variation because by them their subject is variable. Hence it is clear that they vary insofar as they are, for they are not called beings as though they were the subject of being, but because through them something has being. Question 10. The eternity of God. Prologue. We must now consider the eternity of God, concerning which arise 6 points of inquiry. 1. What is eternity? 2. Whether God is eternal. 3. Whether to be eternal belongs to God alone. 4. Whether eternity differs from time. 5. The difference of eternity, as there is one time and one eternity. Article 1. Whether this is a good definition of eternity, the simultaneously whole and perfect possession of interminable life. Objection 1. It seems that the definition of eternity given by Boethius, De Consol 5, is not a good one. Eternity is the simultaneously whole and perfect possession of interminable life. For the word interminable is a negative one, but negation only belongs to what is defective, and this does not belong to eternity. Therefore, in the definition of eternity, the word interminable ought not to be found. Objection 2. Further, eternity signifies a certain kind of duration, but duration regards existence rather than life. Therefore, the word life ought not to come into the definition of eternity, but rather the word existence. Objection 3. Further, a whole is what has parts, but this is alien to eternity, which is simple. Therefore, it is improperly said to be whole. Objection 4. Many days cannot occur together, nor can many times exist all at once. But in eternity, days and times are in the plural, for it is said, His going forth is from the beginning, from the days of eternity. Micah 5:2. And also it is said, according to the revelation of the mystery hidden from eternity. Romans 16:25. Therefore, eternity is not omni-simultaneous. Objection 5. Further, the whole and the perfect are the same thing. Supposing, therefore, that it is whole, it is superfluously described as perfect. Objection 6. Further, duration does not imply possession, but eternity is a kind of duration. Therefore, eternity is not possession. I answer that, as we attain to the knowledge of simple things by way of compound things, so must we reach to the knowledge of eternity by means of time, which is nothing but the numbering of movement by before and after. For since succession occurs in every movement, and one part comes after another, the fact that we reckon before and after in movement makes us apprehend time, which is nothing else but the measure of before and after in movement. Now, in a thing bereft of movement, which is always the same, there is no before or after, as therefore the idea of time consists in the numbering of before and after in movement. So likewise, in the apprehension of the uniformity of what is outside of movement consists the idea of eternity. Further, those things are said to be measured by time which have a beginning and an end in time, because in everything which is moved there is a beginning and there is an end. But as whatever is wholly immutable can have no succession, so it has no beginning and no end. Thus, eternity is known from two sources. First, because what is eternal is interminable, that is, has no beginning nor end, that is, no term either way. Secondly, because eternity has no succession, being simultaneously whole. Reply to objection 1. Simple things are usually defined by way of negation, as a point is that which has no parts. Yet, this is not to be taken as if the negation belonged to their essence, but because our intellect, which first apprehends compound things, cannot attain to the knowledge of simple things except by removing the opposite. Reply to objection 2. What is truly eternal is not only being, but also living, and life extends to operation, which is not true of being. Now, the protraction of duration seems to belong to operation rather than to being. Hence, time is the numbering of movement. Reply to objection 4. As God, although incorporeal, is named in Scripture metaphorically by corporeal names, so eternity, though simultaneously whole, is called by names implying time and succession. Reply to objection 5. Two things are to be considered in time: time itself, which is successive, and the now of time, which is imperfect. Hence, the expression simultaneously whole is used to remove the idea of time, and the word perfect is used to exclude the now of time. Reply to objection 6. Whatever is possessed is held firmly and quietly. Therefore, to designate the immutability and permanence of eternity, we use the word possession. Article 2. Whether God is eternal. Objection 1. It seems that God is not eternal, for nothing made can be predicated of God. For Boethius says, De Trine, Book 4, that the now that flows away makes time, the now that stands still makes eternity. And Augustine says, Octog, Tri, Qua Est, Q or Q 28, that God is the author of eternity, therefore God is not eternal. Objection 2. Further, what is before eternity and after eternity is not measured by eternity. But, as Aristotle says, De Causis, God is before eternity and he is after eternity. For it is written that the Lord shall reign for eternity and beyond. Exodus 15:18. Therefore, to be eternal does not belong to God. Objection 3. Further, eternity is a kind of measure, but to be measured belongs not to God, and therefore it does not belong to him to be eternal. Objection 4. Further, in eternity there is no present, past, or future, since it is simultaneously whole, as was said in the preceding article, but words denoting present, past, and future time are applied to God in Scripture, therefore God is not eternal. On the contrary, Athanasius says in his creed, the Father is eternal, the Son is eternal, the Holy Ghost is eternal. I answer that the idea of eternity follows immutability, as the idea of time follows movement, as appears from the preceding article. Hence, as God is supremely immutable, it supremely belongs to him to be eternal. Nor is he eternal only, but he is his own eternity, whereas no other being is its own duration, as no other is its own being. Now, God is his own uniform being, and hence, as he is his own essence, so he is his own eternity. Reply to objection 1. The now that stands still is said to make eternity according to our apprehension, as the apprehension of time is caused in us by the fact that we apprehend the flow of the now, so the apprehension of eternity is caused in us by our apprehending the now standing still. When Augustine says that God is the author of eternity, that is to be understood of participated eternity, for God communicates his eternity to some in the same way as he communicates his immutability. Reply to objection 2. From this appears the answer to the second objection. For God is said to be before eternity, according as it is shared by immaterial substances. Hence, also in the same book, it is said that intelligence is equal to eternity. In the words of Exodus, the Lord shall reign for eternity and beyond. Eternity stands for age, as another rendering has it. Thus, it is said that the Lord will reign beyond eternity, inasmuch as he endures beyond every age. That is, beyond every kind of duration. For age is nothing more than the period of each thing, as is said in the book De Coelho, Book 1. Or, to reign beyond eternity can be taken to mean that if any other thing were conceived to exist forever, as the movement of the heavens according to some philosophers, then God would still reign beyond, inasmuch as his reign is simultaneously whole. Reply to objection 3. Eternity is nothing else but God himself. Hence God is not called eternal, as if he were in any way measured, but the idea of measurement is there taken according to the apprehension of our mind alone. Reply to objection 4. Words denoting different times are applied to God because his eternity includes all times, not as if he himself were altered through present, past, and future. Article 3. Whether to be eternal belongs to God alone. Objection 1. It seems that it does not belong to God alone to be eternal, for it is written that those who instruct many to justice shall be as stars unto perpetual eternities. Dan 12:3. Now, if God alone were eternal, there could not be many eternities. Therefore, God alone is not the only eternal. Objection 2. Further, it is written, Depart, ye cursed, into eternal fire. Matthew 25:41. Therefore, God is not the only eternal. Objection 3. Further, every necessary thing is eternal, but there are many necessary things, as, for instance, all principles of demonstration, and all demonstrative propositions. Therefore, God is not the only eternal. On the contrary, Jerome says, EP ad Damasum 15, that God is the only one who has no beginning. Now, whatever has a beginning is not eternal. Therefore, God is the only one eternal. I answer that eternity, truly and properly so called, is in God alone, because eternity follows on immutability, as appears from the first article. But God alone is altogether immutable, as was shown above, question 9, article 1. Accordingly, however, as some receive immutability from him, they share in his eternity. Thus, some receive immutability from God in the way of never ceasing to exist. In that sense, it is said of the earth, it standeth forever. Eccles 1:4. Again, some things are called eternal in Scripture because of the length of their duration, although they are in nature corruptible. Thus, Psalm 75:5, the hills are called eternal, and we read of the fruits of the eternal hills, Deuteronomy 33:15. Some again share more fully than others in the nature of eternity, inasmuch as they possess unchangeableness, either in being or further still in operation, like the angels and the blessed, who enjoy the word, because, as regards that vision of the word, no changing thoughts exist in the saints, as Augustine says, De Trine 15. Hence, those who see God are said to have eternal life. According to that text, this is eternal life, that they may know thee, the only true God, etc. John 17:3. Reply to objection 1. There are said to be many eternities, accordingly as many share in eternity by the contemplation of God. Reply to objection 2. The fire of hell is called eternal not only because it never ends. Still, there is change in the pains of the lost. According to the words, to extreme heat they will pass from snowy waters. Job 24:19. Hence, in hell, true eternity does not exist, but rather time. According to the text of the psalm, their time will be forever. Psalms 80:16. Reply to objection 3. Necessary means a certain mode of truth, and truth, according to the philosopher Metaphysics 6, is in the mind. Therefore, in this sense, the true and necessary are eternal, because they are in the eternal mind, which is the divine intellect alone. Hence, it does not follow that anything beside God is eternal. Article 4. Whether eternity differs from time. Objection 1. It seems that eternity does not differ from time, for two measures of duration cannot exist together, unless one is part of the other. For instance, 2 days or 2 hours cannot be together. Nevertheless, we may say that a day or an hour are together, considering hour as part of a day. But eternity and time occur together, each of which imports a certain measure of duration. Since therefore eternity is not a part of time, for as much as eternity exceeds time and includes it, it seems that time is a part of eternity, and is not a different thing from eternity. Objection 2. Further, according to the philosopher Physics 4, the now of time remains the same in the whole of time, but the nature of eternity seems to be that it is the same indivisible thing in the whole space of time. Therefore, eternity is the now of time, but the now of time is not substantially different from time. Therefore, eternity is not substantially different from time. Objection 3. Further, as the measure of the first movement is the measure of every movement, as said in Physics 4, it thus appears that the measure of the first being is that of every being, but eternity is the measure of the first being, that is, of the divine being. Therefore, eternity is the measure of every being, but the being of things corruptible is measured by time. Time, therefore, is either eternity or is a part of eternity. On the contrary, eternity is simultaneously whole, but time has a before and an after. Therefore, time and eternity are not the same thing. I answer that it is manifest that time and eternity are not the same. Some have founded this difference on the fact that eternity has neither beginning nor an end, whereas time has a beginning and an end. This, however, makes a merely accidental and not an absolute difference, because granted that time always was and always will be, according to the idea of those who think the movement of the heavens goes on forever, there would yet remain a difference between eternity and time, as Boethius says, De Consol 5, arising from the fact that eternity is simultaneously whole, which cannot be applied to time. For eternity is the measure of a permanent being, while time is a measure of movement. Supposing, however, that the aforesaid difference be considered on the part of the things measured, and not as regards the measures, then there is some reason for it, inasmuch as that alone is measured by time, which has beginning and end in time. Hence, if the movement of the heavens lasted always, time would not be of its measure as regards the whole of its duration, since the infinite is not measurable, but it would be the measure of that part of its revolution which has beginning and end in time. Another reason for the same can be taken from these measures in themselves, if we consider the end and the beginning as potentialities, because, granted also that time always goes on, yet it is possible to note in time both the beginning and the end by considering its parts. Thus, we speak of the beginning and the end of a day or of a year, which cannot be applied to eternity. Still, these differences follow upon the essential and primary differences, that eternity is simultaneously whole, but that time is not so. Reply to objection 1. Such a reason would be valid, 1, if time and eternity were the same kind of measure. But this is seen not to be the case when we consider those things of which the respective measures are time and eternity. Reply to objection 2. The now of time is the same as regards its subject in the whole course of time, but it differs in aspect, for inasmuch as time corresponds to movement, its now corresponds to what is movable, and the thing movable has the same one subject in all time, but differs in aspect, a being here and there, and such alteration is movement. Likewise, the flow of the now, as alternating in aspect, is time, but eternity remains the same according to both subject and aspect, and hence eternity is not the same as the now of time. Reply to objection 3. As eternity is the proper measure of permanent being, so time is the proper measure of movement, and hence according as any being recedes from permanence of being and is subject to change, it recedes from eternity and is subject to time. Therefore the being of things corruptible, because it is changeable, is not measured by eternity, but by time. For time measures not only things actually changed, but also things changeable. Hence, it not only measures movement, but it also measures repose, which belongs to whatever is naturally movable, but is not actually in motion. Article 5. The difference of eternity and time. Objection 1. It seems that eternity is the same as time, for Augustine says says Gen. Ad lit. 8, 20, 22, 23 that God moves the spiritual through time, but eternity is said to be the measure of spiritual substances. Therefore, time is the same as eternity. Objection 2. Further, it is essential to time to have before and after, but it is essential to eternity to be simultaneously whole, as was shown above in the first article. Now, eternity is not eternity, for it is written, Ecclus 1:1, that eternal wisdom is before age. Therefore, it is not simultaneously whole, but has before and after, and thus it is the same as time. Objection 3. Further, if there is no before and after in eternity, it follows that in eternal things there is no difference between being, having been, or going to be. Since then, it is impossible for eternal things not to have been. It follows that it is impossible for them not to be in the future, which is false, since God can reduce them to nothing. Objection 4. Further, since the duration of eternal things is infinite, as to subsequent duration, if eternity is simultaneously whole, it follows that some creature is actually infinite, which is impossible. Therefore, eternity does not differ from time. On the contrary, Boethius says, De Consol 3, who commandeth time to be separate from eternity. I answer that eternity differs from time and from eternity, as the mean between them both. This difference is explained by some to consist in the fact that eternity has neither beginning nor end, eternity a beginning but no end, and time both beginning and end. This difference, however, is but an accidental one, as was shown above in the preceding article, because even if eternal things had always been, and would always be, as some think, and even if they might sometimes fail to be, which is possible to God to allow, even granted this, eternity would still be distinguished from eternity and from time. Others assign the difference between these three to consist in the fact that eternity has no before and after, but that time has both together with innovation and veteration, and that eternity has before and after without innovation and veteration. This theory, however, involves a contradiction, which manifestly appears if innovation and veteration be referred to the measure itself. For since before and after of duration cannot exist together, if eternity has before and after, it must follow that with the receding of the first part of eternity, the after part of eternity must newly appear, and thus innovation would occur in eternity itself, as it does in time. And if they be referred to the things measured, even then an incongruity would follow. For a thing which exists in time grows old with time, because it has a changeable existence, and from the changeableness of a thing measured, there follows before and after in the measure, as is clear from Physics 4. Therefore, the fact that an eternal thing is neither inveterate nor subject to innovation comes from its and changelessness, and consequently its measure does not contain before and after. We say then that since eternity is the measure of a permanent being, insofar as anything recedes from permanence of being, it recedes from eternity. Now some things recede from permanence of being, so that their being is subject to change or consists in change, and these things are measured by time, as are all movements, and also the being of all things corruptible. But others recede less from permanence of being, forasmuch as their being neither consists in change nor is the subject of change. Nevertheless, they have change annexed to them either actually or potentially. This appears in the heavenly bodies, the substantial being of which is unchangeable, and yet with unchangeable being they have changeableness of place. The same applies to the angels, who have an unchangeable being as regards their nature with changeableness, as regards choice. Moreover, they have changeableness of intelligence, of affections, and of places in their own degree. Therefore, these are measured by eternity, which is a mean between eternity and time. But the being that is measured by eternity is not changeable, nor is it annexed to change. In this way, time has before and after. Eternity in itself has no before and after, which can, however, be annexed to it, while eternity has neither before nor after, nor is it compatible with such at all. Reply to Objection 1. Spiritual creatures, as regards successive affections and intelligences, are measured by time. Hence also Augustine says, Gen. ad lit. 8, 20, 22, 23, that to be moved through time is to be moved by affections, but as regards their nature they are measured by of eternity, whereas regards division of glory they have a share of eternity. Reply to Objection 2. Of eternity is simultaneously whole, yet it is not eternity, because before and after are compatible with it. Reply to Objection 3. In the very being of an angel, considered absolutely, there is no difference of past and future, but only as regards accidental change. Now to say that an angel was, or is, or will be, is to be taken in a different sense according to the acceptation of our intellect, which apprehends the angelic existence by comparison with different parts of time. But when we say that an angel is or was, we suppose something, which, being supposed, its opposite, is not subject to the divine power. Whereas when we say, he will be, we do not as yet suppose anything. Hence, since the existence and non-existence of an angel considered absolutely is subject to the divine power, God can make the existence of an angel not future. But he cannot cause him not to be while he is, or not to have been after he has been. Reply to Objection 4. The duration of eternity is infinite, forasmuch as it is not finished by time. Hence, there is no incongruity in saying that a creature is infinite, inasmuch as it is not ended by any other creature. Article 6. Whether there is only one of eternity. Objection 1. It seems that there is not only one of eternity. For it is written in the apocryphal books of Esdras, Majesty and power of ages are with thee, O Lord. Objection 2. Further, different genera have different measures, but some of eternal things belong to the corporal genus, as the heavenly bodies, and others are spiritual substances, as are the angels. Therefore, there is not only one of eternity. Objection 3. Further, since of eternity is a term of duration, where there is one of eternity, there is also one duration. But not all of eternal things have one duration, for some begin to exist after others, as appears in the case especially of human souls. Therefore, there is not only one of eternity. Further, things not dependent on each other do not seem to have one measure of duration, for there appears to be one time for all temporal things, since the first movement, measured by time, is in some way the cause of all movement. But of eternal things do not depend on each other, for one angel is not the cause of another angel. Therefore there is not only one of eternity. On the contrary, A of eternity is a more simple thing than time, and is nearer to eternity, but time is one only. Therefore much more is A of eternity one only. I answer that a twofold opinion exists on this subject. Some say there is only one A of eternity. Others that there are many A of eternities. Which of these is true may be considered from the cause why time is one. For we can arise from corporal things to the knowledge of spiritual things. Now, some say that there is only one time for temporal things, for as much as one number exists for all things numbered, as time is a number, according to the philosopher Physics 4. This, however, is not a sufficient reason, because time is not a number abstracted from the thing numbered, but existing in the thing numbered. Otherwise, it would not be continuous. For 10 ells of cloth are continuous not by reason of the number, but by reason of the thing numbered. Now, number as it exists in the thing numbered is not the same for all, but it is different for different things. Hence, others assert that the unity of eternity, as the principle of all duration, is the cause of the unity of time. Thus, all durations are one in that view, in the light of their principle, but are many in the light of the diversity of things received duration. But are many in the light of the diversity of things receiving duration from the influx of the first principle. On the other hand, others assign primary matter as the cause why time is one, as it is the first subject of movement, the measure of which is time. Neither of these reasons, however, is sufficient, for as much as things which are one in principle or in subject, especially if distant, are not one absolutely but accidentally. Therefore, the true reason why time is one is to be found in the oneness of the first movement, by which, since it is most simple, all other movements are measured. Therefore, time is referred to that movement, not only as a measure is to the thing measured, but also as accident is to subject, and thus receives unity from it. Whereas to other movements, it is compared only as the measure is to the thing measured. Hence, it is not multiplied by their multitude, because by one separate measure many things can be measured. This being established, we must observe that a twofold opinion existed concerning spiritual substances. Some say that all proceeded from God in a certain equality, as Origen said, peri archon, one, or at least many of them, as some others thought. Others said that all spiritual substances proceeded from God in a certain degree and order, and Dionysius, Coelhier, 10, seems to have thought so, when he said that among spiritual substances there are the first, the middle, and the last, even in one order of angels. Now, according to the first opinion, it must be said that there are many A of eternities, as there are many A of eternal things of first degree. But according to the second opinion, it would be necessary to say that there is one A of eternity only, because since each thing is measured by the most simple element of its genus, it must be that the existence of all A of eternal things should be measured by the existence of the first A of eternal thing, which is all the more simple the nearer it is to the first. Wherefore, because the second opinion is truer, as will be shown later, question 47, article 2, we concede at present that there is only one A of eternity. Reply to objection 1. A of eternity is sometimes taken for age, that is, a space of a thing's duration, and thus we say many A of eternities when we mean ages. Reply to objection 2. Although the heavenly bodies and spiritual things differ in the genus of their nature, still they agree in having a changeless being, and are thus measured by A of eternity. Reply to objection 3. All temporal things did not begin together. Nevertheless, there is one time for all of them, by reason of the first measured by time, and thus all A of eternal things have one A of eternity, by reason of the first, though all did not begin together. Reply to objection 4. For things to be measured by one, it is not necessary that the one should be the cause of all, but that it be more simple than the rest. Question 11. The unity of God. Prologue. After the foregoing, we considered the divine unity, concerning which there are 4 points of inquiry. 1. Whether one adds anything to being. 2. Whether one and many are opposed to each other. 3. Whether God is one. And 4. Whether he is in the highest degree one. Article 1. Whether one adds anything to being. Objection 1. It seems that one adds something to being, for everything is in a determinate genus by addition to being, which penetrates all genera. But one is a determinate genus, for it is the principle of number, which is a species of quantity. Therefore, one adds something to being. Objection 2. Further, what divides a thing, common to all, is an addition to it. But being is divided by one, and by many. Therefore, one is an addition to being. Objection 3. Further, if one is not an addition to being, one and being must have the same meaning, but it would be nugatory to call being by the name of being. Therefore, it would be equally so to call being one. Now this is false. Therefore, one is an addition to being. On the contrary, Dionysius says, Div Nom 5, Ult. Nothing which exists is not in some way one, which would be false if one were an addition to being, in the sense of limiting it. Therefore, one is not an addition to being. I answer that one does not add any reality to being, but is only a negation of division. For one means undivided being. This is the very reason why one is the same as being. Now, every being is either simple or compound, but what is simple is undivided, both actually and potentially, whereas what is compound has not being while its parts are divided, but after they make up and compose it. Hence, it is manifest that the being of anything consists in undivision, and hence it is that everything guards its unity as it guards its being. Reply to Objection 1. Some thinking that the one convertible with being is the same as the one which is the principle of number were divided into contrary opinions. Pythagoras and Plato, seeing that the one convertible with being did not add any reality to being, but signified the substance of being as undivided, thought that the same applied to the one which is the principle of number. And because number is composed of unities, they thought that numbers were the substances of all things. Avicenna, however, on the contrary, considering that one, which is the principle of number, added a reality to the substance of being. Otherwise, number made of unities would not be a species of quantity, thought that the one convertible with being added a reality to the substance of beings, as white to man. This, however, is manifestly false, inasmuch as each thing is one by its substance. For if a thing were one by anything else but by its substance, since this again would be one, supposing it were again one by another thing, we should be driven on to infinity. Hence, we must adhere to the former statement. Therefore, we must say that the one which is convertible with being does not add a reality to being, but that the one which is the principle of number does add a reality to being belonging to the genus of quantity. Reply to Objection 2. There is nothing to prevent a thing which in one way is divided, from being another way undivided, as what is divided in number may be undivided in species. Thus, it may be that a thing is in one way one, and in another way many. Still, if it is absolutely undivided, either because it is so according to what belongs to its essence, though it may be divided as regards what is outside its essence, as what is one in subject may have many accidents, or because it is undivided actually and divided potentially, as what is one in the whole and is many in parts. In such a case, a thing will be one absolutely and many accidentally. On the other hand, if it be undivided accidentally and divided absolutely, as if it were divided in essence and undivided in idea or in principle or cause, it will be many absolutely and one accidentally, as what are many in number and one in species or one in principle. Hence, in that way, being is divided by one and by many, as it were by one absolutely and by many accidentally. For multitude itself would not be contained under being, unless it were in some way contained under one. Thus Dionysius says, Div nom cap ult, that there is no kind of multitude that is not in a way one, but what are many in their parts are one in their whole, and what are many in accidents are one in subject, and what are many in number are one in species, and what are many in species are one in genus, and what are many in processions are one in principle. Reply to objection 3. It does not follow that it is a negatory to say being is one, for as much as one adds an idea to being. Article 2. Whether one and many are opposed to each other. Objection 1. It seems that one and many are not mutually opposed, for no opposite thing is predicated of its opposite, but every multitude is in a certain way one, as appears from the preceding article. Therefore one is not opposed to multitude. Objection 2. Further, no opposite thing is constituted by its opposite, but multitude is constituted by one. Therefore it is not opposed to multitude. Objection 3. Further, one is opposed to one, but the idea of a few is opposed to many. Therefore one is not opposed to many. Objection 4. Further, if one is opposed to multitude, it is opposed as the undivided is to the divided, and is thus opposed to it as privation is to habit. But this appears to be incongruous, because it would follow that one comes after multitude, and is defined by it, whereas, on the contrary, multitude is defined by one. Hence, there would be a vicious circle in the definition, which is inadmissible. Therefore one and many are not opposed. On the contrary, things which are opposed in idea are themselves opposed to each other. But the idea of one consists in indivisibility, and the idea of multitude contains division. Therefore one and many are opposed to each other. I answer that one is opposed to many, but in various ways. The one, which is the principle of number, is opposed to multitude, which is number, as the measure is to the thing measured. For one implies the idea of a primary measure, and number is multitude measured by one, as is clear from Metaphysics 10. But the one which convertible with being is opposed to multitude by way of privation, as the undivided is to the thing divided. Reply to objection 1. No privation entirely takes away the being of a thing, inasmuch as privation means negation in the subject, according to the philosopher, Categories 8. Nevertheless, every privation takes away some being, and so in being, by reason of its universality, the privation of being has its foundation in being, which is not the case in privations of special forms, as of sight, or of whiteness, and the like. And what applies to being, applies also to one and to good, which are convertible with being. For the privation of good is founded in some good. Likewise, the removal of unity is founded in some one thing. Hence, it happens that multitude is some one thing, and evil is some good thing, and non-being is some kind of being. Nevertheless, opposite is not predicated of opposite, for as much as one is absolute and the other is relative, for what is relative being as a potentiality is non-being absolutely, that is, actually. Or what is absolute being in the genus of substance is non-being, relatively as regards some accidental being. In the same way, what is relatively good is absolutely bad, or vice versa. Likewise, what is absolutely one is relatively many, and vice versa. Reply to objection 2. A whole is twofold. In one sense it is homogeneous, composed of like parts. In another sense it is heterogeneous, composed of dissimilar parts. Now in every homogeneous whole, the whole is made up of parts having the form of the whole, as, for instance, every part of water is water, and such is the constitution of a continuous thing made up of its parts. In every heterogeneous whole, however, every part is wanting in the form belonging to the whole, as, for instance, no part of a house is a house, nor is any part of a man a man. Now multitude is such a kind of a whole. Therefore, inasmuch as its part has not the form of the multitude, the latter is composed of unities. As a house is composed of not houses, not indeed, as if unities constituted multitude, so far as they are undivided, in which they are opposed to multitude, but so far as they have being, as also the parts of a house make up the house by the fact that they are beings, not by the fact that they are not houses. Reply to objection 3. Many is taken in two ways, absolutely and in the sense it is opposed to one, in another way as importing some kind of excess, in which sense it is opposed to few. Hence, in the first sense, two are many, but not in the second sense. Reply to objection 4. One is opposed to many, privatively, inasmuch as the idea of many involves division. Hence, division must be prior to unity, not absolutely in itself, but according to our way of apprehension. For we apprehend simple things by compound things, and hence we define a point to be what has no part or the beginning of a line. Multitude, also, an idea, follows on one because we do not understand divided things to convey the idea of multitude, except by the fact that we attribute unity to every part. Hence, one is placed in the definition of multitude, but multitude is not placed in the definition of one. But division comes to be understood from the very negation of being. So, what first comes to mind is being, secondly, that this being is not that being, and thus we apprehend division as a consequence. Thirdly, comes the notion of one. Fourthly, the notion of multitude. Article 3. Whether God is one. Objection 1. It seems that God is not one, for it is written, "For there be many gods and many lords." 1 Corinthians 8:5. Objection 2. Further, one as the principle of number cannot be predicated of God, since quantity is not predicated of God. Likewise, neither can one which is convertible with being be predicated of God, because it imports privation, and every privation is an imperfection, which cannot apply to God. Therefore God is not one. On the contrary, it is written, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one." Our God is one Lord. Deuteronomy 6:4. I answer that it can be shown from these three sources that God is one. First, from his simplicity, for it is manifest that the reason why any singular thing is this particular thing is because it cannot be communicated to many, since that whereby Socrates is a man can be communicated to many, whereas that makes him this particular man is only communicable to one. Therefore, if Socrates were a man, by what makes him to be this particular man, as there cannot be many Socrates, so there cannot be in that way be many men. Now this belongs to God alone, for God himself is his own nature, as was shown above, question 3, article 3. Therefore, in the very same way God is God, and he is this God, impossible is it therefore that many gods should exist. Secondly, this is proved from the infinity of his perfection, for it was shown above, question 4, article 2, that God comprehends in himself the whole perfection of being. If, then, many gods existed, they would necessarily differ from each other. Something therefore would belong to one which did not belong to another, and if this were a privation, one of them would not be absolutely perfect, but if a perfection, one of them would be without it. So it is impossible for many gods to exist. Hence, also the ancient philosophers, constrained as it were by truth, when they asserted an infinite principle, asserted likewise that there was only one such principle. Thirdly, this is shown from the unity of the world. For all things that exist are seen to be ordered to each other, since some serve others. But things that are diverse do not harmonize in the same order, unless they are ordered thereto by one. For many are reduced into one order, by one better than by many, because one is the per se cause of one, and many are only the accidental cause of one, inasmuch as they are in some way one. Since therefore what is first is most perfect, and is so per se and not accidentally, it must be that the first which reduces all into one order should be only one, and this one is God. Reply to objection 1. Gods are called many by the error of some who worshipped many deities, thinking as they did the planets and other stars were gods, and also the separate parts of the world. Hence the apostle adds, "Our God is one," etc. Reply to objection 2. 1, which is the principle of number, is not predicated of God, but only of material things. For 1, the principle of number belongs to the genus of mathematics, which are material in being, and abstracted from matter only in idea. But 1, which is convertible with being, is a metaphysical entity, and does not depend on matter in its being. And although in God there is no privation, still, according to the mode of our apprehension, he is known to us by way only of privation and remotion. Thus, there is no reason why a certain kind of privation should not be predicated of God. For instance, that he is incorporeal and infinite, and in the same way it is said of God that he is one. Article 4. Whether God is supremely one. Objection 1. It seems that God is not supremely one, for one is so called from the privation of division, but privation cannot be greater or less. Therefore, God is not more one than other things which are called one. Objection 2. Further, nothing seems to be more indivisible than what is actually and potentially indivisible, such as a point in unity. But a thing is said to be more one according as it is indivisible. Therefore, God is not more one than unity is one, and a point is one. Objection 3. Further, what is essentially good is supremely good. Therefore, what is essentially one is supremely one. But every being is essentially one, as the philosopher says, Metaphysics 4. Therefore, every being is supremely one, and therefore God is not one more than any other being is one. On the contrary, Bernard says, De Concede 5, among all things called one, the unity of the divine Trinity holds the first place. I answer that, since one is an undivided being, if anything is supremely one, it must be supremely being, and supremely undivided. Now both of these belong to God, for he is supremely being inasmuch as his being is not determined by any nature to which it is adjoined, since he is being itself, subsistent, absolutely undetermined, but he is supremely undivided inasmuch as he is divided, neither actually nor potentially, by any mode of division, since he is altogether simple, as was shown above, question 3, article 7. Hence it is manifest that God is one in the supreme degree. Reply to objection 1. Although privation considered in itself is not susceptive of more or less, still according as its opposite is subject to more or less, privation also can be considered itself in the light of more and less. Therefore, according as a thing is more divided, or is divisible, either less or not at all, in the degree it is called more or less or supremely one. Reply to objection 2. A point and unity, which is the principle of number, are not supremely being, inasmuch as they have being only in some subject. Hence neither of them can be supremely one, for as a subject cannot be supremely one, because of the difference within it of accident and subject, so neither can an accident. Reply to objection 3. Although every being is one by its substance, still every substance is not equally the cause of unity, for the substance of some things is compound and of others simple.